Serious, what was the dirtiest trick ever pulled in the history of war? During the Second World War, German forces would rig crooked wall paintings to explode when straightened with hopes that it would kill Allied officers when they came in to set up command posts. The logic being that Private Joe Blow clearing the building, looking for enemies isn't going to care, or even notice if a painting is askew. But General Robert Important Guy, who sets up his new command post in the building and is in his office for hours, probably would. The Germans also strung piano wire across roads to take out anyone riding by in a jeep. When Timur the Lame was about to attack the city of Shivas, he promised the 3,000 Christian Armenian Sipahis that he would not shed any of their blood if they surrendered. They did, and, true to his word, he had them all buried alive. In World War I, the Allies became used to the smell of chemical weapons and would put their gas masks on quickly. The Germans changed their tactics and would use nearly odorless vomit-inducing chemicals that would absorb quickly into the lungs first. Then, once soldiers were vomiting and couldn't keep their gas masks on, they would fire the main artillery barrage containing the lethal chemicals. I feel like the Great War was the worst war of them all. Conventional weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, bloody muddy trenches, getting clubbed in the face as if it were medieval times. Yeah, not good. All wars following have been more about ideologies and principles. Not saying wars since have been any better or worse, but at least World War II had a reason to fight Germany. The actor George Sanders found out that his friend, David Niven, was very chummy with Winston Churchill during the war. He asked Niv to give the Prime Minister a note detailing his idea for a new bomb that the RAF could drop on German cities. It would be exactly the same as all the old bombs, except it would have a wind-activated siren attached to it, so when the bombs dropped, the German civilian population hiding in shelters would hear the siren, think that the all clear was being sounded and come out, just as the bombs hit. Niven didn't say how Churchill took the idea. Many bombs during World War II on both sides had implemented whistles due to the well-known demoralizing effect it has. In the trenches of France of World War I, General Monash was given with the unenviable task of punching through the German line to claim the French town of Le Hamel. The way that Monash went about doing this was both revolutionary and bloody sneaky. The German forces were well equipped and well fortified, reinforced with heavy artillery and machine guns, and the troops were very well trained. Faced by these odds, Monash began to condition the German forces. Every day at dawn, he would let loose a barrage of smoke bombs followed by mustard gas canisters. The Germans, following their training, would equip themselves with gas masks which protected them. Monash kept up this bombardment for 2 weeks, and soon the Germans became accustomed to the pattern of attack, and would immediately don their gas masks and hunker down at the first sign of smoke. But on the dawn of the 4th of July, the smoke bombs were not followed by gas, but by the Australians. The German gas masks protected them from mustard gas and smoke, but they also vastly impeded their vision, hearing, and ability to communicate with the noise of the battle and the obscuring smoke. They were deaf and blind on the battlefield, and to make things worse, this was not an unprotected infantry massed attack, but a creeping barrage supported by a division of tanks, heavy artillery, and aircraft. The tanks protected the vulnerable infantry, and the artillery and aircraft prevented the Germans from effectively deploying anti-tank measures. The battle was over in just 90 minutes, and marked the rise of mixed arms warfare. Not sure if this counts as a trick, but Napoleon, prior to the Battle of Marengo, not only did he cross the Alps with his entire army, a completely unexpected move, but once across, the Austrians thought Napoleon would move to Genoa in order to relieve the siege of that city. Thousands were dying of starvation, and French General Massena desperately called for Napoleon's aid. Napoleon, in a ruthless and surprising move, ignored the calls for help and instead moved to attack the main portion of the Austrian army, eventually winning the Battle of Marengo. Massena surrendered Genoa, and it would be years before he eventually forgave Napoleon for abandoning him, and it would be years before Napoleon forgave Massena for surrendering. I like how Napoleon expected his general to either die trying or saving the city. The Battle of Majnoon in the Iraqi-Iranian War. You wait until nighttime, and you will see how we are killing these Iranian dogs, an Iraqi officer said with a broad grin. We are frying them like eggplants. He then took us on a tour of dozens of thick electrical cables his troops had lain through the marshy battlefield, a spaghetti network that snaked in and out of the patchwork of lagoons. He showed us the mammoth electric generators that fed the exposed power lines from positions just behind the Iraqi front lines. And, when the Iranian Revolutionary Guards made their regular evening advance, the officer and his men demonstrated the macabre genius of their invention. Iraqi gun batteries fired just enough artillery to force the Revolutionary Guards from their marsh boats, and, when hundreds of them had been forced to continue their advance through the lagoons on foot, the men manning the Iraqi generators flipped a few switches and sent thousands of volts of electricity surging through the marshland. Within seconds, hundreds of Iranians were electrocuted. This occurred nightly. Between this, human wave attacks involving children to charge positions and clear minefields, and chemical weapons attacks on civilians, the Iran-Iraq war was pretty fricked up. Before the Battle of Yorktown US Civil War, Confederate General Magruder was able to convince McClellan that he had 40,000 troops manning his defenses, rather than his actual force of 10,000. If I recall correctly, he found a point in the defenses where he knew his troops would be observed and counted, and marched them past that point several times. McClellan had 120,000 troops and superior artillery, but like always, hesitated to attack even with superior numbers. He also thought that another general was approaching with 60,000 men close to the actual number, and didn't want to attack Magruder's 40,000 and be hit by the 60,000 as well, so he waited for his own reinforcements and more reconnaissance. If he had attacked Magruder, he would have overwhelmed him and been able to prepare for Johnston's arrival. Instead, he waited to attack until Magruder's forces were reinforced. Johnston arrived and added even more troops, and the Confederates were eventually able to slip away from the battle with only 300 casualties. There's a prevailing sentiment that if McClellan wasn't so cautious, the Civil War could have been won in 1861. His waiting and retreating and not pursuing retreats to prevent casualties have the South time to mobilize and present a strong military threat, instead of cutting through them like the hot knife they were through the South's proverbial butter. The British pulled a dirty trick during the African campaign in World War II. At every well and oasis they could find they hung a sign that said danger, poison in English and German. It was only when the Germans complained that poisoning wells was a war crime that the British pointed out that yes, poisoning wells was a crime, but merely hanging signs was not. The water was perfectly drinkable. According to some records in The Art of War, it is considered a good strategy to corner your men and have the enemy attempt to wipe them out, because when the only means of escape survival is through the enemy, then your own men will fight to the death. Throw your soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. If they will face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Sun TZU. Dirtiest trick that was conceived but not used was British scientists formulating a plan of dropping anthrax-laced linseed cakes into cattle fields as a bio-nuke of sorts once it worked up the food chain. After initial experiments destroyed pretty much all life on the island they used, they decided that possibly killing off everything in continental Europe probably wasn't a good idea. According to the wiki, the government didn't plan on even cleaning the test island up until a group of scientists dropped off contaminated soil at a military research facility and threatened to make further drops in order to ensure the rapid loss of indifference of the government and the equally rapid education of the general public. Terrorism wins again. The Russians and their use of a scorched earth policy. I can't think of a better way to flip off your invaders than ruining all your own crap so when they do take it, it's worthless. Not only that, but the land itself is just too dang cold. So go ahead, take the land. You will just freeze to death. Congratulations. Russia also gets to enjoy a strategy almost no one else gets to enjoy, retreating because there's so much land versus their neighbors. The enemy must advance and stretch out their supply lines, while Russia shortens their supply lines. Genghis Khan, in a large-scale attack against the fortress at Volohay, after being unable to breach the walls, demanded 1,000 cats and 10,000 Chinese swallows in exchange for lifting the siege. When the defenders sent out the animals, Genghis took them and tied tufts of cotton to their tails and ignited them, at which point the animals rushed back to their homes within the city, igniting hundreds of small fires, while Genghis' army attacked again and took the fortress amidst the panic. Pretty lucky they went home and didn't run around panicked and blazing. Not so dirty, but Turks had the Turan tactic. The army would form it into a crescent, with the arms of the crescent being the armored, strong divisions and middle front being the fastest divisions and middle back being the highest firepower, cannons. They'd start the battle lined up and charge, then the fast middle front guys would start retreating to the lines behind the middle back, the cannons. The arms of the crescent would hold firm because they were the armored part. The enemy would think they were retreating completely, because it looks like they are losing their crap and also their formation, and will chase after them only to be met with the cannons and to be encircled by the crescent's arms. It was a slaughter of the enemy after that. Hannibal did a similar thing, before he was defeated by the same tactic. Washington, crossing the Delaware, sneaked into the Hessian camp while they were drunk and celebrating Christmas. 3 American losses versus 22 losses on the Hessian side and 1,000 prisoners, capture of their weapons, gunpowder, and supplies. Desperate times, man, since it probably saved the revolution. So there's this kind of honey made in Turkey called mad honey. It's made from the pollen of rhododendron flowers. If you eat very much of it you get very intoxicated, and you often hallucinate. You can even OD on it. A few times in antiquity, it was used as a weapon of war. For example, the Persians left some out for the Romans to find. The Romans ate that sweet crap right up, and then the Persians attacked them while they were all tripping balls and defenseless. Where can I get this honey? Back in the English Civil War there was a certain nobility in battle where you were supposed to be able to see your opponents and you would stand and fight. Cromwell decided this was stupid and in numerous battles would send troops round the side hidden by trees and bushes to tear through the cavaliers before the fight properly began. It was a lot dirtier a trick at the time. I think the start of World War II when Hitler made prisoners dress like Polish soldiers and let them attack Germany so that Germany could run over Poland. Sneaky bastard. Also promising not to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia after being given all their border defenses, then proceeding to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia basically unopposed. Hopefully it hasn't been mentioned already, but some of the USA's tricks during the Cold War to assassinate Fidel Castro were pretty mad. One idea attempted by the CIA included putting thallium salts into his shoes so that his beard, eyebrows and body hair to fall out. It was considered that this would cause his downfall as no one would take him seriously after that. The British wanted to put doses of estrogen in Hitler's food to make him more feminine. They thought he would then be more caring and end the war. Hannibal's snake-filled pots, which were loaded onto catapults. There was a time of World War I called Live and Let Live, both sides essentially refusing to fight and coming out of the trenches together, socializing. After the generals on one side, I think it was the British, but could be wrong, found out about this, they devised a dirty trick. The British lured the Germans out of their trench by playing a traditional German anthem and cut them all down, thus ending the days of Live and Let Live. From Radiolab program about morality, a truly mind-blowing episode. The US firebombed Tokyo, because their houses were mostly made of wood, they knew the city would burn. Even the guy who drafted the plan, Robert McNamara, was ashamed of it. They also tried strapping thermite to bats and releasing them over Japan, in the hope they would roost in the houses, then go off and burn the houses down. The plan was cancelled after all the facilities where this was being tested burned down due to incendiary bats roosting in them. Scipio Africanus was fighting against the Carthaginians. One battle in particular, both sides lined up in battle formation for consecutive days. Each side was also using Iberian mercenaries on their flanks, with their native troops in the center. Several days passed with no actual fighting. Eventually Scipio Africanus ordered that his Roman legionaries line up on the flanks rather than the Iberian mercenaries. As expected, the Carthaginians lined up the original way and Scipio ordered his troops to attack. The Roman legionaries, being better equipped and better trained, crushed the Iberians fighting for the Carthaginians and rolled up their flanks. This ended up being a decisive victory for the Romans. Maybe not the dirtiest, but according to my point of view a very unethical trick. Near the end of the Great War, Italy and Austria signed a contract of peace on the 3rd November 1918. The Austrians thought that the contract was valid from the moment the signature was written, but in fact the contract became valid on the several days after the 3rd November. But the Austrian troops have already started to travel back home. Thus South Tyrol was unprotected. The Italian army recognized that and silently invaded South Tyrol. The dirty trick comes now. An Italian named Ettore Tolomei always wanted South Tyrol to become a part of Italy, so he translated the names of very common locations into the Italian language. Then he presented his map to the Allies, claiming that South Tyrol had previously been a part of Italy. Due to that lie, South Tyrol was promised to Italy in the Treaty of London. Since then our small region is a part of Italy. Like this video or this chonker will sit right on top of your house. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.